Off the eastern shore of Pohnpei, a small green island lost in the open Pacific, thousands of kilometers from any continent, the reef gives way to a shallow lagoon. And there, where you would expect only water and mangrove, the sea is full of walls. Black walls of stone, rising straight out of the tide. Not one ruin, but dozens. A whole city laid out across the water, its buildings standing on islands that were never there before people made them. There are no streets. Between the walls run canals, and to move through the city at all, you go by canoe, gliding down channels of green water between towering stacks of dark rock. We give the place a name now, Nan Madol. In the local language, it means the spaces between the islands. 92 of them, by the most cited count. 92 artificial islets, built up from the floor of the lagoon and joined into a single floating capital. People have called it the Venice of the Pacific, but Venice was raised on wooden piles driven into mud. Nan Madol was built out of stone, hundreds of thousands of tons of it, set down on top of a living coral reef, out on the open sea. And that is where the mystery begins, because the stone these walls are made of is basalt, heavy volcanic rock, and the largest pieces here weigh as much as 50 tons. Some 750,000 tons of it were quarried, carried, floated, and stacked into place by a people who had no wheel, no metal tools, no pulleys, no draft animals, and no written plans. By every measure we use to explain the great works of the ancient world, this one should not exist. The question is not only how they did it, the question is why anyone would build a city on the sea at all. And to answer it, we have to go back to the moment the first black stone broke the surface of the lagoon. Unlike so many lost cities, Nan Madol was never really lost. The people of Pohnpei always knew it was there. They had simply learned to stay away from it. For generations, the ruins out in the lagoon were treated as a place of power and danger. The home of the old kings and their dead, a site so heavy with spirits that ordinary people did not sleep there, and some would not go at all after dark. The knowledge of who built it and how was wrapped in oral tradition and taboo, carried in stories rather than records. The outside world came to it slowly. In the 1830s, an Irish castaway named James O'Connell, shipwrecked in the Pacific, is said to have walked among the ruins and lived to describe them, among the first outsiders to do so. Through the 19th century, traders and missionaries carried home rumors of a stone city standing in the sea on a far Pacific island, and few of them were believed. It was not until the early 1900s when the German colonial administration sent the ethnographer Pohnpei to survey Pohnpei that Nan Madol was finally mapped and measured in detail. Pohnpei counted the islets, paced the walls, and brought back the first hard evidence that the stories were true. And what the surveys revealed was stranger than the rumors. This was not a village that had drifted out onto the water. It was a planned city. The islets were deliberately shaped, rectangular platforms of stone and coral fill, arranged into districts and divided by a grid of canals that filled and emptied with the tide. One half of the city was for the living, dwellings, meeting places, the seat of power. The other half was for ritual and for the dead. Somebody had looked at an empty stretch of reef and decided to raise an entire stone capital out of the sea, and then had the means to actually do it. To stand inside Nan Madol is to lose your sense of scale. The city stretches for more than 1.5 kilometers along the reef, covering some 75 hectares, and almost every surface of it is built from the same extraordinary material. The Pohnpeians built with basalt, but not basalt as we usually picture it. When certain lavas cool slowly, they crack as they harden into long, straight columns, many-sided in cross-section, like enormous pencils of stone. Pohnpei has outcrops of exactly this kind of columnar basalt, and the builders of Nan Madol used the columns as though they were timber. They laid them down in alternating layers, one course running one way, the next course crossing it, stacking them log cabin style into walls that lean slightly inward and hold themselves together by sheer weight. Between and behind the basalt, they packed coral rubble to form the solid cores of the islands. The numbers are hard to take in. By common estimate, the city contains around 750,000 tons of stone. Individual basalt columns routinely weigh several tons. The largest are thought to reach as much as 50. No mortar holds any of it together. Everything stands by mass and balance alone, and most of it has stood for the better part of 1,000 years, through earthquakes and storms, and the endless working of the sea. The greatest of the structures is a place called Nan Madol, the royal mortuary, the tomb complex of the kings. Its outer walls rise as high as 7.5 meters, course of basalt log on basalt log, with cornerstones estimated to weigh dozens of tons apiece. Inside sits a central vault. You arrive from a city of canals, pass through walls taller than a house, and come to rest at the still heart of the whole place. The reason, in many ways, that all the rest of it was raised. This was not simply a city on the water, it was a city built around its dead. A city of stone is impressive anywhere, but Nan Madol's walls hide a problem that grows heavier the longer you look at it. Because the basalt did not come from here. The islets sit on a coral reef. There is no basalt beneath your feet at Nan Madol. Every stone had to be brought in. The columns are believed to have come from quarries elsewhere on Pohnpei, around the island's volcanic heights, some of them well across the island by sea, which means that each of those stones, 750,000 tons of them, some weighing as much as a loaded truck, had to be broken loose, moved down to the coast, ferried across open water, and then lifted into place on top of a reef. Now hold in your mind everything the builders did not have. No wheel, no iron or steel to cut and dress the stone. Only tools of rock, shell, and bone. No pulleys, no block and tackle, no cranes, no horses, no oxen, no large animal of any kind to haul a load, and no written record of method anywhere to tell us how it was done. The usual answer is rafts. The columns, it is thought, were floated, lashed to canoes or to rafts, or perhaps slung beneath them and walked along the reef at the right tide, then levered up the rising walls on ramps with ropes and brute patience. It is plausible. It is almost certainly close to the truth. But here is the uncomfortable part. No one has ever fully demonstrated it. When researchers try to estimate the labor involved, the numbers strain belief. A large share of the island's entire population, working across generations just to move the stone. And a 50-ton basalt column does not behave on the open water the way a thinker at a desk would like it to. This is the hard center of Nan Madol. We can see exactly what was done. We still cannot say, with confidence, how. So who raised it? Here for once we have a real answer. And then beyond it, the place where history runs out. Archaeology and Pohnpeian oral tradition agree on the broad shape of the story. Nan Madol was the capital of a dynasty known as the Saudeleur, the first rulers to unite the whole of Pohnpei under a single line of kings. From roughly the 12th century onward, the Saudeleur governed the island from this city on the water, drawing tribute from the surrounding districts and keeping the nobility close, where they could be watched. The megalithic city we see today rose under their rule, generation after generation, as a seat of power and a resting place for their dead. Their reign endured until around the early 1600s, when by tradition, a warrior named Isokalakel overthrew the last Saudeleur and remade the island's politics, after which the great city slowly fell quiet. That is the mainstream account, and it is well supported. But alongside it runs an older story, one the Pohnpeians themselves tell. In the traditional telling, the city was founded by twin sorcerers, two brothers, Olasipa and Olasopa, who came across the sea to build a place to honor the gods. When ordinary effort failed, they raised the great stones into place with the help of magic, or in some versions, a flying dragon, that carried the basalt through the air. It is a myth, but it is honest evidence in its own right. When a people's own explanation for their greatest monument is that the stones must have flown, it tells you how far beyond ordinary memory the effort had already passed. And then, out at the fringes, are the theories we should name only to set aside. Some popular writers have tried to tie Nan Madol to a sunken continent, a lost Pacific motherland called Mu, or Lemuria, and to make its stones the wreckage of a vanished super-civilization. There is no evidence for any of it. Nan Madol does not need an imaginary lost continent. The real builders were Pohnpeians, and the real achievement is theirs, which is, if anything, far harder to explain than a fairy tale. For centuries, the stones of Nan Madol kept their silence. They carry no inscriptions, no carved king lists, no dates. But in the last few decades, archaeologists have found ways to make the basalt itself speak. The breakthrough came from chemistry. Every flow of volcanic rock carries a faint chemical fingerprint, a precise blend of elements left by the particular eruption that made it. In the 2010s, a team led by the archaeologist Mark McCoy carried portable instruments out to the ruins and tested the stone where it stood, then matched those fingerprints against the basalt of quarries around Pohnpei. For the first time, specific stones in the city could be traced back to specific sources across the island, turning vague guesses about where the basalt came from into a real map of supply, written in the chemistry of the rock. And the stone could be made to give up its age as well. As volcanic basalt cools, it locks in a record of the Earth's magnetic field at that moment. By reading that magnetism and combining it with other dating, researchers pinned the rise of the monumental city to around the late 12th century, roughly the 1180s. That single date carries enormous weight. It means the tomb of Nandawas was one of the earliest great monuments anywhere in the Pacific Islands, and that the Saudeleur of Pohnpei built a centralized capital, a true seat of state power, earlier than almost anyone had assumed possible for this part of the world. Piece it together, and a picture emerges that is more impressive than any legend. No dragon, no lost continent. Instead, an island society that organized itself so completely, its labor, its quarries, its canoes, its tides, that it could move 750,000 tons of stone out onto the sea and build a capital there, centuries before much of the world managed anything to compare. The stones did not fly. People moved them. That is the reveal, and it is by far the harder thing to believe. And yet, for everything the stone has finally told us, the deepest questions are still open. We still cannot say, with real confidence, how the heaviest columns were moved and lifted. We know roughly where they came from and roughly when. We do not have a proven method, no surviving ramp, no tool marks that settle the argument, no experiment that has floated a 50-ton basalt log across a reef and raised it into a wall the way it must once have been done. The single most physical fact about Nan Madol, that the stones are up there at all, remains the thing we can least explain. We are not even certain why they built on the water in the first place. Was it defense? A capital ringed by canals that an enemy could not easily storm? Was it control? A way to gather the island's restless nobles onto islets where the king could keep them under his eye? Was it sacred? The separation of the dead and the divine from the world of the living by a moat of moving sea? Perhaps it was all three. The canals are silent on the point, and we do not fully know why it ended. At some stage after the fall of the Saudeleur, the great city was gradually abandoned. The population that had sustained it dwindled. The canals silted, the walls were left to the mangroves and the tide. Today, Nan Madol is a World Heritage Site, and an endangered one, slowly being prized apart by roots and weather in the same sea it was built upon. So picture it once more, the way the first outsiders saw it. Black walls standing in the water, with no road in and no one living among them. A whole city raised on the ocean by hand, for reasons we can only partly name, by a method we cannot fully reconstruct, and then quietly given back to the sea. We know who built it now. We still do not entirely know how or why they chose the water. Some cities, it seems, were always meant to keep part of their secret. Nan Madol has given up some of its secrets. We know its builders now, the Saudeleur kings of Pohnpei, and we can trace their black stone back to the quarries it came from. But the heart of the mystery still stands in the water, unexplained. How a people with no wheel and no metal moved 750,000 tons of basalt out onto a reef, and why they chose to build their capital on the open sea at all. Some cities don't want to be found, and some were built deliberately just beyond the edge of what we can explain. Buried worlds. Next time, we leave the ocean for the emptiest desert on Earth and a legendary lost city that was swallowed whole by the sand until a satellite traced its roads from space. They called it the Atlantis of the Sands. We call it Ubar. Ubar, a lost city of the desert, swallowed by the sand and found again from orbit.